Welcome back to the first episode of the 2024 season on the Sweep College Baseball Podcast, otherwise now known as the Sweepstakes. Today we're going to run through a couple different things, starting off with our preseason college baseball rankings, going through some potential futures bets of teams that could potentially make Omaha and win the whole thing that have really good odds at this point, and then running through some predictions. 8 teams to make Omaha, some of the biggest surprises, busts, player of the year, pitcher of the year, national champion, that kind of thing. And then, wrap it up. But starting things off, I wanna start it off a little bit different. Throw a little curveball in the mix, if you will. Before we really get into this episode, I just have a little announcement. I would like to, announce that after much deliberation and discussions with family, friends, teammates, that I'll be leaving the Sweep podcast and entering the transfer portal. The NIL money out there is just too good, and get that bag. So I'll be taking a step away and pursuing that goal.
Yeah, we're sad to.
That is definitely true fact. I'm out of here. It's definitely not a joke about NIL. Yeah, sorry to let the fans down. All right, after that, we're just gonna jump right into our preseason rankings. Much deliberation on this. We've worked as a team to set this up to what we think could potentially give us a good run for our money. Last year, our preseason rankings, we got 13 out of the 25 teams from our final rankings. So hopefully we better there. And crush the overall rankings, and some of these expected teams continue to do well, unlike last year with a few of the big dogs being pretty terrible. But starting things off, I guess at that number one spot, surprise, Wake Forest, really no weaknesses. Their pitching is going to be insane this year, just elite pitching staff overall, especially their starting pitching. Maybe a little bit worse in the bullpen than they were last year, but that's just because they were super elite in that spot pretty much everywhere. And their offense also looks super solid.
Yeah, I mean, just an extremely talented team. Got Josh Hartle, Chase Burns on the mound, and Nick Kurtz leading the offense. This team's just incredibly talented. Got third place at the College World Series last year, but it really felt like second with that series against LSU. Pretty much felt like everyone knew that whoever won that series was going to win the title series. And yeah, just extremely talented team that lost some good players, but has plenty still in the tank here.
Yeah, that's definitely what it felt like. But going next is the team that actually did finish second, Florida. The Florida Gators, elite offense. We'll be seeing some of those huge numbers of production, especially home runs, most likely, and should have a decent pitching staff. I mean, obviously, they should be set up in a pretty good position at number 2 overall preseason. But, I feel like if Jack Caglione can figure things out on the mound even more than last year, they could definitely vie for that number 1 spot and make a really good run in postseason.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Jack Caglione just really tore it up on offense last year and was one of the best two-way players in the country. But it seems like there's still a lot of room for improvement on the mound. If he's able to take those next steps and this team just figures it all out, that's a team we could see in that title matchup again.
Yeah, I think it's primarily just consistency for Caglione. I mean, we saw some of his games super, super good, but, in others, especially like the College World Series final, he just struggled to find that command and was kind of all over the place. So if he can hone that in a little bit, maybe take some velo off in some areas and focus more on control, then really see some really good numbers on offense or on pitching, and if he can get kind of close to what we saw on offense there, then he's going to be vying for that number 1 overall draft spot. But jumping now to another SEC foe in Arkansas at that 3 spot, really good pitching, and looks like they'll have a really good offense as well. Was a little bit of a down year last year, surprisingly, even though they were just solid all over the place. But, not making Omaha is a little tough for Arkansas teams that always has that kind of aspiration. But this year, I think they're really set up to make a run for Omaha.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, just like the last decade or so, it seems like the expectation for Arkansas every year is to end up in Omaha at the end of the year. Didn't quite get there last year, but a lot of talent this year. Hagen Smith leading the way on the mound, and there is a lot of upside on that offense as well. Seems like a season that they could put it together and make a run into the title series again potentially.
For sure. And again, at number 4, another SEC team. Will be repeating that line a lot. SEC just all over the rankings, like most other years. We dropped LSU a little bit further than maybe other rankings had. I just think there's some question marks. Obviously, they lost a lot of that top end talent. They're able to replace it pretty well, but when you lose out on guys like Dylan Cruz and maybe just one of the best pitchers we've ever seen in the past decade or 2 decades, it's going to be tough to fill those specific holes, but they've done a really good job to fill it, and looks like their offense and pitching should be in a very good spot to be able to compete in the SEC.
Yeah, it's by far one of the best rosters in the country. But like you said, when you have to replace the number one and number two picks in the draft, that's a lot of stats to fill, a lot of production to fill. And they probably do have the guys to fill that, but it may take a while to figure that out. Wouldn't be surprised to see this team have immense success once again, but there are a lot of shoes to fill.
For sure. And at 5, we have Oregon State. For me personally, I really like what this team looks like. The makeup of their roster, super solid, and it seems like this team just might have a chip on their shoulder. Next year, they're going to be free agents, just going up against whoever they can find. No conference there, so I feel like Oregon State might be able to really push. Maybe that they don't have the most talented roster, but they have a solid group, both pitching and hitting, and I think that chip on their shoulder could just push them a little bit further than a lot of these other teams.
Yeah, a bit of a down year last year for Oregon State after losing Jerpy and Jacob Melton. Wasn't the most talented team last year, but they didn't really lose anyone, and they bring in a really good freshman class, a good transfer class, and like you said, it's the last year of the Pac-12. They have something to prove. They look like the top team in the conference, and there's definitely a lot of experience at this point, and feel like they could put something together.
Yeah, in the Pac-12, it definitely looks like Oregon State and everybody else, with a lot of small question marks with a lot of those other teams. Seems like there's 5, 6, 7 other potentially decent teams, but they all have reasonable question marks out there, and some of them will probably figure it out and be able to ride past it, but it's tough to be able to compete against an Oregon State team that is set up like the way they are right now. So after that, we have TCU in the 6th spot, team that you necessarily don't see this high up in the rankings, especially the first Big 12 team out there, but solid overall, similar to Oregon State, just an all-around team, no real weaknesses out there. And I think after this 6th spot, I don't feel as confident with the rest of the rankings, but feel like those top 6 teams have kind of set themselves apart in the preseason, at least talent-wise. Looks like they should be at the top for most of the year.
Yeah, TCU building off the Omaha run from last season. Like you said, similar to Oregon State, didn't really lose a lot of people, so a lot of experience on the club. And it seems like this is a bit of a down year for the Big 12. So it could be a year that they potentially dominate in the regular season, secure themselves a national seed, and have home field advantage throughout the playoffs up until Omaha. So I don't think it's unrealistic to say the expectation for them is to be in contention to make the Omaha this year.
Yeah, and all the teams that we've now previously mentioned, I think, don't have glaring issues or glaring question marks that you can easily point to and say, hey, that's an area I'm not really sure of what's going to happen. Good things may come from it, but all these teams really look solid in pretty much every facet of the game. Next up, we have Tennessee at number 7. This is a team that should be insane offensively, but there are some questions outside of beam pitching. But you know what? Sometimes if you have that ace on the mound, it kind of fills itself out for the rest of the weekend. If you can get a really good outing out of your best pitcher, then it's makes the rest of the weekend super easy. So if Beam can be that top dog, then this offense should be able to carry the rest of the week.
Yeah, it definitely hurts for them to lose Chase Burns in the transfer portal this offseason, but still an extremely talented roster all around. And I mean, this has been one of the most exciting and annoying teams in college baseball the last couple of years, and they're trying to build a dynasty there. And to do that, you have to get to the national championship. You have to win one to get in that dynasty conversation, but they certainly have the talent and are able to get to that level.
Yeah, and now going back into the bag of the SEC, we're going to drop Texas A&M at 8. Offensive big overhaul, getting a bunch of transfers with a lot of power, but definitely major question marks on pitching. They were one of the worst pitching staffs in the SEC and country, for a matter of fact. I mean, obviously, it doesn't help when you're going up against these SEC offenses, but there's still a lot of question marks there on the pitching staff, but the offense should be able to kind of negate a lot of that. Just a lot of these SEC teams have really good offenses already and decent pitching staff, so they need to be able to stack up somehow, pitching wise.
Yeah, this is one of those teams in the intro that we mentioned just really disappointed last year. They were an absolute lock to be a top five team in pretty much all of the preseason rankings. Didn't end up ranked, didn't end up even as a good team in general, but they looked to build off of that, looked to bounce back and maybe try and meet the expectations of what there was last year. Didn't really lose a whole lot since there wasn't that much talent, that much success last year, but still there is talent this year and a lot of at bats, a lot of innings coming back. So potential to put together the season that they're looking for.
Yeah, the transfers that they got in should really boost that offense even more than they already were. But after that, Duke at number 9. I'm really high on this team. They had the best bullpen last year, didn't really lose anyone, and they got a starting pitcher. So if that bullpen can kind of be similar to what we saw last year, and you have a little bit more longevity out of your starting pitchers, this would be huge for a Duke team that might not be the best offensively. A lot of transfers on offense, but if they can kind of piece it together, get some runs here or there, should be able to shut down games and really be able to make comebacks if they're down late.
Yeah, I also have a good outlook on Duke this year. It seems like those programs that aren't necessarily the mainstays at the top, but are good programs, they kind of go through those ebbs and flows of being good, having a couple rough years, and then building back. And they had a couple rough years. Last year, they got back on track, and maybe this is the year where they peak and find that success that they've been looking for recently.
Yeah, last year they had a lot of momentum late in the season. So if they can just bring that forward to the next year, it should be good to see that team. And now rounding out the top 10 of our preseason rankings, we have our first mid-major team, East Carolina. Looks like they should have a pretty dang good offense. And if other pitchers can step up besides Savage, then they could be a really good team. Should be able to run through their conference. And yeah, if that's the case, then they can definitely jump up in the rankings. That always helps when you're not facing the best competition week in, week out. Can just slowly whittle down the other teams.
Yeah, this team's been consistently dominating their conference and been in the rankings for quite a while now. Kind of a fan favorite team in college baseball. Everyone wants to see them make Omaha. People love rooting for the mid majors, and when a team like this constantly finds success, you want to see them finally crack into that type of notoriety. And we'll see if they're able to make it this year. Like you said, there's a lot of talent and some question marks on the pitching staff, but if they put it together, they could certainly be in contention.
Yep, for sure. And next up, we have another team from Carolina. NC State should have a really good offense overall, and pitching has the potential to be really good. Seems a little bit young, so they might struggle maybe at the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, we should be looking to see that team to be locked and ready to go.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite teams heading into this year. A little down in the rankings, but I really like this team. NC State always produces offensively. I think they'll do that again this year. You might not know exactly what you're getting on the pitching staff, but I do think they have enough talent and enough experience to really put together a good team and be contenders in the ACC.
Yeah, for sure. And after them at number 12, we have a team that has dropped pretty far down in our rankings that should be able to know at this point that many other places have pretty high, but we decided that the question marks for this Vanderbilt team are a lot. I mean, on offense especially, they lost their power in RJ Schreck last year, and they really didn't have much power overall. He was that one guy, and so there are question marks there. So I don't know. Obviously, they have talent. It's Vanderbilt. They're always going to bring in top recruiting classes, but really need an offense to be able to compete in the SEC. Their pitching should be decent, should be all there, but you need to get offense from somewhere. So really need some players to step up there that maybe you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, like you said, especially last year, it just didn't seem like the classic type of Vanderbilt team that we're used to seeing in the last decade or so. If you watch them in that regional against Oregon and Xavier, they just didn't look like the team that strikes fear into opponents and is just extremely talented. They certainly have the talent on there, and we don't doubt their ability to develop young players. But last year, you just didn't really see that come to fruition. And I'm not sure they added enough to really jump back up to where we're used to seeing them. But we'll see how the season goes for them.
Yeah, definitely. And then after them at 13 is Virginia. I feel like there are some comparisons between them and NC State. I think their offense should be pretty good, but their pitching might have a little bit of question marks. Should be decent, just a bit inexperienced. So maybe by later in the year, they'll have those innings under their belt and start to turn things around, but might start off a little slow.
Yeah, another really good team. I mean, we're seeing that the ACC is pretty top heavy this year. Quite a few teams up here, really talented, and a lot of offensive clubs. So should be an exciting year in that conference. And we think Virginia is going to be on the top end and contending for to be at the top of that conference. So
Yeah, for sure. And sticking with the ACC, we have Clemson up next at 14. I think similar to Duke last year, they were getting hot super late. Unfortunately, ran into the buzzsaw in regionals against Tennessee, so wasn't able to come through that. Super close games. They probably could have closed things out there, but was not able to beat that Tennessee offense, unfortunately. But overall, Clemson is definitely going in the right direction. They should have a pretty good offense, but still a lot of newer faces. It looks like the coaching staff is kind of trying to form a new identity there since they're relatively new. And yeah, it might take a little bit of time to gel and get that offense really clicking.
yeah, Clemson was a bit of a surprise team for how much success that they found last year, but super exciting team to watch. And like you said, felt like they should have won that regional against Tennessee, just couldn't quite put it together. But hopefully, with the year of postseason experience under the belt, they'll be able to build off that going into this year.
Yep, definitely. And then at 15, we have a Big 12 team in Texas. Think there are a few question marks, but overall, looks like a pretty solid squad, especially in the pitching if they can really figure things out. But, it's also offensive side, a few good offensive players, but some inexperience elsewhere. So might need a few top dogs to carry that offense. But looking at pitching, we have LeBaron Johnson had a great year last year, so we'll rely heavily on him. And then if Tanner Witt can figure his stuff out, obviously he was a top guy for, expected last year. Didn't really pan out because of injuries and whatnot. But I think if he can really hone in this year, that pitching staff can have a really good 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I think this team's interesting because there's not necessarily anything that screams like super good, but I feel like they're good everywhere. And there's certainly talent and there's upside, but I feel like there's not really any holes in this team. So they should be a top 25 team. I feel like it's just a matter of what their ceiling really is.
Yeah, there are a lot of Big 12 teams that could be fringe top 25, so definitely a lot of competition around that area. Texas maybe just has a few more solidifications on starting pitching and have a few good offensive players, maybe a few little question marks here and there, but yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of competition for that back end Big 12 spot, maybe the second best Big 12 team, if you will. And then after that, we have UCSB, another mid-major at 16. Think the pitching is really going to be dominant this entire year. Offense should be decent, but really, really leaning on this pitching staff with a few potential All-Americans there.
Yeah, and that's what this program has done historically, just produced really good starting pitchers. And this seems like another year where their whole rotation just could be really dominant. And being in the Big West, probably a conference they can just run through this year. And if they're able to do that, maybe solidify themselves as a host. And it seems like this pitching staff really has the ability to carry this team deep in the year.
Yeah, especially with the Pac-12 down, there might be a few open spots for a host on the West Coast, with that usually being Stanford in Northern California, just always taking that spot and having a team like UCSB as the 2 seed there. And sometimes a team like UCSB maybe should host, but doesn't have that resume. But this is a year that they could definitely be dominant in their league and be able to kind of carry that through regionals. And then after that, at 17, we have South Carolina, another SEC team. I don't even know how many we've said at this point, but their offense should be insanely good. Another SEC team with just power everywhere. Pitching definitely has question marks, with a lot of players leaving last year. Really up in the air there, but I think their offense should be able to carry them through a lot of games.
Yeah, this was one of the most exciting teams in the SEC last year and had one of the most exciting players in the country with Ethan Petrie just absolutely dominated as a freshman. And it'll be exciting to see what he can do this year as a sophomore. But yeah, a lot of competition in the SEC, but this is a really good offense, and we think they'll be able to hang with anyone just based off of that.
Yeah, Petrie's getting a lot of votes for potentially player of the year, but definitely need things to go right for the whole team to probably be able to lock that down. After that, we have, I guess, our second Pac-12 team in UCLA. Pretty high on them at 18. I think, they've had a lot of injuries over the past few years. Every year it seems like they're a top 25 preseason team, and then they just instantly fall out with some injuries and just bad luck, just not playing well. I think this is the year that maybe they're going to be able to turn it around. Seems like they have a really talented squad. They always do. Southern California, that UCLA is always going to be able to pull those recruits in. And this year, I think if they're able to stay healthy, unlike the past 2 years or 3 or 4, or however many we've seen, I think this UCLA team could have the potential to make Omaha maybe win the whole thing if they're able to build and put it together, but definitely have some question marks because they just haven't had the experience.
Yeah, like you said, it seems really talented, but with the injuries the last couple years, it is a lot of question marks. It feels like this team has an extremely high ceiling, but you really just don't know what you're going to get. This could be a national contender. This team could be a bust. It's really hard to know, but I feel like you have to put them in the rankings just for the upside.
Yeah, and there's definitely that need for at least one other Pac-12 team in there. There's a lot of teams around that area where, yeah, maybe they should be ranked, but so many teams from that 25 to 40 spot is filled with really a lot of talent, just a few question marks, maybe a few more than a solid team like UCLA probably should be. And yeah, speaking of solid teams in a conference that usually doesn't do too well, we have Iowa at 19. Really solid overall. Should hopefully be able to dominate the Big Ten. Big Ten is surprisingly, not like a Power 5 conference. They're just in their own world for some reason. But maybe after this year, by grabbing a few of those teams from the Pac-12, might be able to shift things around a bit. Maybe have a little bit more influence in the college baseball world with a few more bigger teams able to at least play earlier in the season at home. But overall, I think this team is really, yeah, like I said, solid. And with Brody Brecht, if he can be elite, maybe the best pitcher in the year, then this team can go far if they can really ride off that.
Yeah, I mean, we know in college baseball, if you have a bona fide Friday ace, that you can make it a long ways, and that's what they have here. And especially with, not that the Big Ten has necessarily good years, but it seemed like they had a decent year last year, and it seems like Maryland's going to be back down after having a couple good years. So it kind of seems like this is Iowa's conference to lose. I feel like they should have this in the bag pretty easily if they're able to just meet their potential. And yeah, should be an interesting season to see what they put together in the long run.
Yep, definitely. And then rounding out our top 20 is Coastal Carolina, where their offense has a lot of power. They're always a hype team. Everybody loves Coastal Carolina. Pitching is definitely a question mark. Luckily, they're not in the most competitive conference, so we'll be able to figure things out through there, but definitely don't want to slip up all over the place with their pitching, but hopefully their offense can lead them through.
Yeah, this is another uh, smaller conference mainstay at this point, constantly finding themselves in the rankings, especially after their national championship run. And yeah, looks like a pretty complete team for the most part. A couple question marks, but I think there's another high ceiling for them, and they could be in the run to find some success like they did last year.
Yeah, definitely. And then staying in the Carolinas once again, the back-to-back Carolina picks. We have North Carolina, which should have a very good offense. Hopefully Honeycutt can figure things out. Obviously last year was a bit of a down year, didn't have the same power, and had a lot more swing and misses than we saw his freshman year. But offense should be decent overall. Really big issues come in the pitching, where there is a lot of inexperience. Potential is there, but definitely need to figure things out throughout the season.
Yeah, they have one of the best players in the country in Vance Honeycutt, one of the favorites for the Golden Spikes Award, and yeah, a lot of potential. Again, these teams towards the end of the top 25, we certainly know they have potential and some upside. There's just a few question marks, and you're not really sure what you're going to get out of them. But this is a team that could certainly make some noise.
Yeah, definitely. And then at 22, another mid-major, Northeastern. They popped up last year as a team that, you don't usually see around the top 25, but they are really solid all over the place. Should be the class of their conference and just completely outclass their competition for the most part. Very good overall squad. Have a lot of power, surprisingly. So should be able to stay in the top 25 if they're able to match their potential.
Yeah, it could be a dominant group of five team, have some really talented players on that squad. And yeah, this is a mid major that could make some noise once again. They started to put it together at the end of last year, and we'll see if they're able to build off that.
Yeah, definitely. And then at 23, we have the team of potentially another National Player of the Year, West Virginia. JJ Weatherholt should be carrying this team. Hopefully, he can do that and match numbers that we saw last year, if not better. But if he can put up like a 20 home run, 50 steal season like his potential is, then this team could be really good. But I feel like a lot of the weight lies on his shoulders. So it's going to be tough. There's a lot of Big 12 teams around this area right outside the top 25. So West Virginia sneaking in, but definitely a lot of competition for that spot.
Yeah, like you said, there's quite a few fringe top 25 teams in the Big 12, but kind of gave West Virginia the nod here with Weatherholt leading the way. It feels like when you have one of the best players in the country, that can just be an X factor for a team. And with the Big 12 seemingly having a bit of a down year this year, we think that could boost West Virginia's success a little bit too.
Yeah, we saw how things played out last year. The Big 12 also was somewhat down. Preseason, a lot of teams all over the top 25, but by the end of the year, not as much all over the place, and the RPI showed that. But this year, potentially, if teams really figure things out, that there could be a resurgence, but it relies a lot on some of these top players. And after that, at 24, we have Alabama. I think it's going to be tough to compete in the SEC overall, but their pitching could be really good. A lot of reliance on their pitching here. I feel like Vanderbilt has a similar style, but the offense has a lot of question marks, especially for Alabama. A lot of transfers coming in big roles. Obviously, there was the coaching change last year, and they did surprisingly well after that. But it'll be interesting to see how things play out with the first full year of a new coaching staff.
Yeah, it seems like Alabama was sparked a little bit after that pitching change. And it seems like at the bottom of this top 25, you always have one of those SEC teams that's just barely above 500 in conference. Like that could be Alabama here. They do have a higher ceiling, I'd say, but it's going to be a team that's solid in SEC play, and I think they could end up in the rankings.
Yep, for sure. And at 25, the last team in our preseason top 25. It's hard to fill. We had a few teams definitely vying for this spot, but we decided Kansas State has potentially the most potential out there to be able to stay in the top 25 and jump up. But really, pitching is the big question mark. Offense should be pretty good, but looking at pitching, they have potentially, if not the best closer, Tyson Neighbors. So that's always nice to have that in the back end of things. If things get dicey, can always throw him out there. But there are definitely some rotational issues on their pitching staff that they need to figure out before this team can be really good.
Yeah, just another fringe Big 12 team here, but you feel like there's always going to be a few teams in that conference in the top 25 at any given time. And this is another one that found some success last year. I think they can build off that and be interesting to see what they're able to put together.
Yeah, I mean, Texas Tech and Oklahoma State both being outside the top 25 is something you usually don't see. They were all over the place in the top 25 last year, and this year it just seems like there might be a few teams that are able to jump over them, but we'll see what happens. A lot of these teams are right outside the top 25, like we mentioned. But yeah, on that note, that's it for our top 25. Wasn't that a fun little time getting through all that? A lot of potential, upsets here and there and switcheroos around, but feel like this is decent. Well, we'll see what the end of the season says, but hopefully we have more than 13 right, like last year. So we'll see. Now we're going to bring in the stakes part of the Sweepstakes podcast by looking at some futures bets of teams that we think have a really good chance, at least odds-wise, of making the national championship and winning the whole thing. The odds are from FanDuel, but that can change here or there, depending on if anybody wants to shoot over some money, perchance. But going off of FanDuel odds right now, I have a few teams that really jumped out to me. There are a lot of decent ones, but we're really looking at sleepers here for our best bets. We'll also, throughout the season, be putting together game-by-game bets probably of what we're thinking and have those numbers up on Twitter. Check us out here. Maybe there, somewhere on the screen, where we're going to be going day by day over the weekend on specific games that we think are really good odds, and yeah, we'll be tracking that throughout the season. Hopefully we end up in the money, in the green. So starting out with just futures. For me, I looked and saw Duke really jumped out on FanDuel at plus 4,800. I feel like at this point you have to take those odds, especially where we rank them. Almost the top 10 team really should be actually number 9. Looking at it, but as a number 9 team, 4,800, so 48 to 1. That's some great return on your money if they can really follow through with that. What do you have?
Yeah, I actually also have Duke in mine. Like you said, plus 4,800 to have that for a team in the top 10. That's more of odds you would see for a team that's like fringe top 25. And similarly, I also have NC State, who was plus 75 there. And so same thing, fringe like top 10 team, and you're getting incredible odds on them. I think that's a team that's a contender. And with those odds, I would certainly take that.
Yeah, the NC State one is definitely super tasty. Plus 7,500 is sweet for a team that we talked about potentially being in the top 10 in our preseason ranking. So obviously we're high on them, and other polls are too. I mean, they're still ranked in everywhere else. So plus 7,500, that's saying if every team makes the field and has the same odds, NC State is worse than that. Because that would be 75 teams, right, instead of a 64-team field. Kind of following through, I have a few 60 to 1 odds here. UCLA, UCSB, both teams that we have in our top 25. I think UCSB really has to rely on that pitching for them to be able to make it that far, but I think you take those odds right now. And similarly with UCLA, a team that we mentioned has the potential to be really good if they can put it all together, has some question marks with previous injuries, and they just don't have that experience of really putting it all together like we said, but UCLA plus 6,000 is pretty tasty.
Yeah, I think a lot of those teams around that area are good grabs, especially if you have some belief in their upside. A team that I also put in here, a lot higher up in the rankings and not as great of odds, but a team that I think has some value is Tennessee, plus 1,800. I think that's a lot. I think that's good value for how talented they are. And just given the momentum they've built the last couple of years, I think this is a team that's certainly a title contender. And if you're looking to take one of those teams up top and feel like you have a better chance of it coming through, I think Tennessee's a team you should be looking at.
Yeah, I feel like the SEC usually has a lot of those kind of bad odds at the top, but Tennessee is definitely a team that breaks that mold a bit, and surprisingly, because it seems like Tennessee has just been one of the favorites for the past few years, so it's surprising that they have pretty good odds there. That was it for me. I don't have any more. Those are the ones that really jumped out. Looked further down for even crazier odds, but nothing really jumped off the page for teams that have a potential to run the whole thing. And lastly, for this podcast, we're going to go through some more predictions. Now, these will actually be affiliated with our overall predictions, where each week during the season, we're going to have 5 series where we're going to run through, choose a team to win the series, and then accumulate all those points by the end of the year, and then have these specific predictions that I'll run through also be incorporated into the final results. And really just a competition between me and Kevin here to see who really knows college baseball better. But yeah, so starting things off, we'll do our predictions for the 8 teams we think are going to make Omaha. And I'm guessing we're going to have pretty good number of these teams be overlapping. After that, we have biggest bust, biggest surprise, player of the year, pitcher of the year, and national champion. Now for Omaha, each team that we get correct will count for 2 points, and then for the other ones, each one will be 5 because they're a little bit harder to get those ones right. And so if we do, really rewarded. While during the regular season, every game or every series we get right will just count as 1. So it'll add up in the long run, but these ones definitely should have a little bit more weight just because they're so far out. So starting with 8 for Omaha, I'm gonna just throw out the easy picks here. Obviously, you can look at our top 25 and see kind of a gist of where we think teams might end up, but Wake Forest is one team that I think has a very solid chance of making it.
Yeah, I went ahead and took the top 3 from our rankings. I felt very confident in all 3 of these teams. Wake, Florida, Arkansas. Just feel
Really.
like those teams are extremely solid. I feel like I didn't really want to take the top 4 altogether,
Well,
and I feel like LSU has more shoes to fill, but certainly a team you could put in here, and wouldn't blame you if you
you're not going to like this, but I'm playing this for the points, and I put the top 6. But, you know, so that includes Oregon State, LSU, like you mentioned, and TCU. Yeah, all the top 6. I said it in the rankings bit of this episode. I think they kind of have set themselves up to be a little bit further away from the rest of the top 25 and the nation. I think they have the least amount of question marks. Obviously, some of these teams that have question marks in the top 25 will jump them. Obviously, that's going to happen no matter what, even if you're bang on with your predictions week in, week out. It's going to change. But I think the top 6 have the consistency to be able to stay and make a good run for Omaha.
Yeah, I also have Oregon State and TCU in there. And right behind that, I also have Tennessee, one of my sleeper bet picks as well. And then also on that train, I have NC State. And so that's a little dip down to 11, but not that far.
Yeah, these last few spots really filled up for me quickly because I took all the top 6 teams. So there are a lot of teams like Tennessee that I really wanted to put in there. Really think have a good chance of making it. Especially as well, NC State, a team that I was thinking about potentially making my predictions. But the final 2 that I have here are UCLA and Duke. I really like Duke, even if their offense isn't amazing. I think their pitching should be able to lead them through some pretty tough times. And UCLA has the potential, like we've mentioned multiple times, to be able to boom and really hit stride later in the season if they can figure things out. And yeah, I mean, it's UCLA. They're that brand. They have those recruits. So they're a team that should be vying for a spot like this pretty, year in, year out. So
Yeah, I was going between Duke and East Carolina for my last spot here, but I did give the edge to East Carolina. I just feel like there's a little bit higher chance of them being a national seed, just given they're in a smaller conference and able to rack up the wins in the regular season, potentially host through super regionals. And so I went ahead and gave them the nod over Duke.
nice. So that are, I guess that's both of our 8 for Omaha. I think you went a little bit outside the box there, but still all teams that were ranked. We we didn't just pull something out of nowhere. That would be pretty surprising. But staying along those lines, we have the biggest surprise of the year. I mean, staying inside the top 25 for me, but I think UCLA is that team. Obviously, had them in my 8 for Omaha, so kind of shows that. And I feel like you might have something similar, not UCLA, but a team that has the potential to be there, but maybe has a few question marks here or there.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and kill two birds with one stone here. My biggest surprise of the year is my national champion. It's a team you've heard me talk highly on already, NC State. They have arguably the best catcher in the country in Jacob Cozart. I think that's a really pivotal position for a team that's going to make a long run because they affect both the pitching staff and the position player group. There's a couple guys coming into the lineup with little experience, but NC State has consistently performed well offensively, and I don't think they'll find trouble rounding out that starting nine. And on the pitching staff, they got Dominique Frieden, who started 9 games last year as a freshman, had a 3.59 ERA. And, usually freshman stud pitchers, usually you see them more in a reliever role and then starting games in the sophomore year. But I think him having those games started as a freshman could lead him to be one of the best pitchers in the ACC this year and potentially make a run for pitcher of the year in the conference if it wasn't for Josh Hartle at Wake Forest. Seems like he probably has that in the bag, but you never know. But yeah, I'm really high on this team, and they're a sleeper, and I'm picking them as my national champion as well.
Nice. Well, you jumped the gun a bit, but I'm just going to clarify. UCLA did not end up being the pick for national championship for me. I know it's a surprise, but I might be going along the lines of a team that has a very good chance already preseason to make it. But we'll wait a second on that. We'll jump to our biggest bust or team that had the biggest letdown this year, and I think it's no surprise we put Vanderbilt a little bit down in the rankings. I'm not very high on Vanderbilt. I'm not sure how well they'll be able to compete in the SEC with all those stacked offenses, and for them to just not have seeming like the best offense out there. Pitching should be decent, but if you're not kind of striking fear into the eyes in one way or another with pitching or hitting, then it's going to be tough to consistently get good series results in the SEC.
Yeah, for my most overrated team this year, I'm going to go with North Carolina. A lot of rankings have them around the top 15 or so. But in my opinion, I think this team's closer to being a 3 seed in a regional or even fringe making the tournament than they are to being around 15 to where they'd be a 1 seed in hosting. I really don't think there's much pitching on this staff right now. I think the offense is going to put up numbers, and Vance Honeycutt at the end of the day is an extremely exciting player and by far one of the best defensive center fielders in college baseball. He's sixth in the Golden Spikes odds right now, but at the end of the day, he hit 257 last year, and that's not that great. That's not what you'd expect for someone who's a candidate for Golden Spikes. I think he's extremely talented, and there's a lot of potential. There's no denying that, but I'm not really super convinced about his Golden Spikes odds, and I'm not fully convinced on this team being top 25.
Yeah, I mean, after his freshman year, everybody was all in on Vance Honeycutt, and the swing and miss really got him last year. And I think if he can clean that up a little bit, this could really help the team out and boost them up. But I feel like there's a lot lying on his shoulders, and yeah, really good player. But I feel like the hype might be getting the best out of everybody. But we'll have to see in the future. But we'll jump to national champion. Obviously, you already mentioned NC State for you, but I'm going to go a little bit more of a conventional route and take the number 1 overall team, Wake Forest. Give me the 5 points, please. I'll cash that in now.
Yeah, Wake is really good team, and no surprise to see you pick them. I just felt like going a little deeper down. Didn't want to take the top team, but if you're going for points, I don't blame you at all. It's
Yeah,
an
it just
easy
was
pick.
too easy. It was too easy to pick Waste. Obviously, there's a lot of good teams. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida goes back to back in the making the national championship finals. They have a really really solid team. A lot of solid teams out there in the SEC, but Wake Forest they just have something different in the pitching staff. So they can really rely on that. It doesn't really matter how good the offense is, unless you get, no runs against LSU in what should have been the final, but that's beside the point. Other than that, we have Player of the Year and Pitcher of the Year. For Player of the Year, I'm going with my man, Jack Caglione. I've been on him for a while. Love the guy. If he can just figure things out a little bit more on the pitching side of things, he can be an absolute animal. I think he has potentially the highest potential out there out of any player in college baseball right now, and could easily jump up to be that number one overall pick in the MLB draft if he's able to just clean up things on the pitching side of things and be able to continue to hit as well as he did last year.
Yeah, I mean, amazing player, and when you get the two-way factor there too, that's a lot of value, and certainly should be in contention just based off the fact that he's providing value on both sides there. For my Player of the Year, I went with J.J. Weatherholt at West Virginia. Absolutely dominated last year, and I think the reason that I kind of pushed him over the edge into this Player of the Year spot for me is that it seems like the Big 12 is down this year. And so I think he might be able to eat up those Big 12 pitchers and boost his stats even more than you might expect already. And given that, I think just if he's able to boost the numbers even more, he could jump someone like Jack Caglione, who's performing on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, if he's able to get like 20 home runs, 50 steals, that's pretty good numbers. And I mean, he hit, over 350 last year, so he should be able to be on base a lot. So if he can create havoc in the Big 12, definitely up for contention. But I just couldn't look past Jack Caglione. Obviously was already a Golden Spikes finalist. Missed out to both LSU players, but he's right there if he can continue to have the success he has. And then jumping over to Pitcher of the Year, not going Jack Caglione. I think there's a few pitchers who have a little bit more polish in their game so far, and that for me is Brody Brecht out of Iowa. I think, obviously in the Big Ten, so might have a little bit lesser competition there. But people are comparing him to none other than Paul Skeens if he's able to put it all together. He had a little bit of a command issue last year, a decent amount of walks, but his strikeouts were up there. And if he can really progress and get more control, he could really demolish the competition in the conference.
Yeah, certainly one of the biggest names in college baseball, especially on the pitching side and when you're looking at the draft board too. But for my Pitcher of the Year, I went with Hagen Smith at Arkansas. Had around a 3.6 ERA last year in the SEC. Pretty impressive, but he's going to have another year under his belt. And I was actually looking at last year, and if you took away his ugly start against TCU in the postseason, gave up 8 runs in 1 inning. Obviously, you can't just erase a start, but in the postseason, it can be tough pitching on off days and on little rest potentially. You take away that game, he has a 2.6 ERA on the year. Super impressive, especially when you're playing in absolutely loaded offenses in the SEC. So I think he's bound to have another incredibly dominant season. And when you're in the SEC, you're under a microscope. A lot of people are looking at you and get a lot of more notoriety nationally. And so I think that could boost him over the edge into Pitcher of the Year.
Yeah, definitely. I think if they have comparable years, I think Hagen Smith easily takes it. Just going up against the SEC competition and everybody watching every single game there. He was definitely the other pitcher I had up for that award, but I think Brody Brecht might just be able to absolutely dominate and put up insane numbers, and Hagen Smith might just have a few of those off starts in the SEC because the offenses are so good. But besides that, those are all our predictions. We'll be keeping track of those throughout the season, running through our series predictions and adding all those points up. And that'll be I guess it for the first episode of the 2024 preseason Sweepstakes College Baseball Podcast. It's if you're still here, give us a like, subscribe, or whatever they do on other sites. Well, we're everywhere. Figure it out. Do the good thing and help us out. Help this little podcast grow. But appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.